too far away from the start of round 9. The Australian Touring Car Championship, the Winton Roundup. And they're racing, and Jimmy Richards gets off with a blinder. Gary Scott alongside, grabs another gear. They head down to the first right-hander. Scott will have the line for the turn. Fury got away quickly indeed. Will drop into second or third spot as they come down towards the right-hander. George is already up into third, and that is good, but Richards now finds Gary Scott on the inside of him, and George poking through there on the inside. George Fury going for broke in the opening laps of this race, but Richards holds down second.
05 has come to a halt just out of the first turn. There's Brock.
Brock's car is either locked up solid, something has gone wrong. No, he takes off again. So Brock's race is virtually over. He trails to the field by almost a quarter of a lap. They've worked their way through Autosport. Now up to the right-hander at Castrol with Gary Scott in car number 15. The Peter Jackson Nissan Turbo leading from Jim Richards in the BMW. Then right behind them is, of course, George Fury. Then the first of the Volvos as they work the back part of the course coming down to the S's.
Colin Bond in there as well, just being passed by Robbie Francevic in the number 10 Volvo. So it's John Bauer leading his teammate Francevic, the series leader at the present time. Then Bond, then Dick Johnson, David Oxton, then Tony Longhurst, Graham Crosby, who hasn't had the best at the start.
Great situation for Robbie Francevic in the top 5 already after starting out of position number 7. They make their way down once again to turn number 2. Gary Scott still setting a solid pace, clear of Jimmy Richards in the black BMW. Fury sitting back behind them. John Bowers the next one through, then Robbie Francevic, Colin Bond, and also a good start from Dickie Johnson of Queensland up to
David Oxton is off on the infield, just going out of the sweeper, and Longhurst as well in a spectacular spin, and there's smoke everywhere. Goodness gracious me, there's another car off there as well. There's Longhurst.
Tony Longhurst. A lot of attention paid to Tony in the small car class because obviously he's well positioned in the championship. The man producing the results this weekend is Jimmy Richards. They work the back part of the straight, coming down to the S's again. Gary Scott still in front. Richards in second. George Fury is third. John Bowen, Robbie Francevic.
Oxton's back on the track, by the way, and there was a Commodore that went off there. Can't quite identify it from this angle. But I think the race has been run for Tony Longhurst, that's for sure.
Race settling into a pattern with Scott just doing enough to head it at this stage, clear of Jimmy Richards. Fury just setting back off Jim Richards. And then the 2 Volvos running 1-2. There's Frank Gardner.
Grim-faced.
He would be too. He's got one car running second and another one running out of contention. A little of the smoke and haze as Jimmy Richards in car number 1 still trails Gary Scott. George Fury finding himself under a little bit of pressure here from John Bowe in the Valvoline Volvo.
Yeah, the leading 2 are getting away from Fury, and Bowe poking the nose up underneath Fury's Nissan as they go through the top corner at Castrol and head into the back straight. Robbie Francevic too is all over the back of John Bowe's car.
Dick Johnson in amongst that group as they come down to the S's again. There's the gap, Scott to Richards, then Fury, then Bowe, and Robbie Francevic with Dick Johnson, who's come past Colin Bond's Alpha and moving up behind Robbie Francevic. Graham Crosby back in about 8th spot in the field, then Murray Carter in the Nissan running in 9th.
Neil Crompton, you got some insight into what happened to Brock at the start?
No idea, in fact, Gary. I was caught by surprise. I ran back across the track just in time to turn around and see that Brock was stone motherless last and having to work his way through the field. Although I did notice before I came back into the commentary box that it sounded as though the Commodore had some kind of a miss in it, but we might get a bit more information on that as the race progresses. But interesting also that Longhurst is off to the side of the circuit with what appears to be oil smoke coming out of his car, and he was tangled up in that spin through the very fast sweeper, and he was one of the drivers and certainly one of the cars that was likely to figure well towards the end of what will ultimately be about an hour's racing. And look here as Francevic tries to make a move on the inside of John Bowe. Bowe recording his time in qualifying yesterday on race tyres. Dunlop DO6 radial tyres, a fairly hard compound because they expected to give them a real workout throughout this race. So as they come through, it is still Gary Scott, car 15 from Jim Richards, George Fury, then these 2 Volvos, cars 4 and 10, Bowe and Francevic, then Dick Johnson, Colin Bond and Graham Crosby. The beauty thing about the BMW for this race is its weight, 1,180 odd kilograms, by comparison to the Commodores and perhaps Dick Johnson's Mustang. He's 300 or 350 kilograms better off. And whilst the Nissan is also a relatively light car, its problem is gentle and delicate use of the throttle so as not to heat up those rear tyres, and that's the thing they were most concerned about this morning when I spoke to them. Great shot of the top 5 cars.
Colin Bond also in the background. They're getting very close to retaking Dick Johnson.
Peter Brock is now 10th in a field of 20, having come from last.
Jimmy Richards going through, running second on the road at the moment. And Jimmy Richards, of course, was national champion last year. 37 years of age, comes from Victoria, obviously driving the JPS BMW. And, of course, in this year's championship, second at Amaroo. 6th, not finish rather, at Sandown, then a 10th, 4th, 3rd, 7th and 5th. He's running 4th in the series at the moment on 89 points. So a second place or even a win here today will certainly assist Jim Richards for a top 3 finish in the series for 1986.
Interesting news with the minor placings. Robbie Francevic has gone past John Bowe in car number 10, and the gap from the leader, Gary Scott, back to Peter Brock is 21.5 seconds.
I can't see Peter Brock pulling up the 21 at this pace.
Scott still leads. Jim Richards, George Fury, then Francevic, Bowe, Dick Johnson and Colin Bond are having a nice little battle all of their own ahead of Graham Crosby. Then the veteran Murray Carter, and then Peter Brock.
There's Jimmy Richards going through. They're coming up on a couple of slower cars, but Scott doing a great job in the number 15 car on a very, very tight circuit. Heading down to the sweeper. And there's Richards taking that bunch of slower cars. So let's recap on the Castrol scoreboard. Scott is your race leader. Jimmy Richards running second on the road, and George Fury is third for Nissan.
Coming up for the 11th lap out of 50 in round 9 of the Australian Touring Car Championship. A real wingding here at Winton, particularly the battle for 6th and 7th on the racetrack coming into screen now between Dick Johnson and Colin Bond.
They've been hard at it since, well, probably 5 laps now, with Colin Bond getting very close indeed to Dick as they come through the Ollie S's. This is where he pulls up alongside, but the grunt of the V8 Mustang pulls it down the straight just a little bit quicker. Then he dabs on the brakes, and you'll notice that Bond will close up down through this section of the track.
The interesting thing was that Colin got away better at the start. Then Dick managed to go around him, and here's the shot from the back of Dick Johnson's Mustang through Seven's race cam. And not too far behind these two drivers, we've got Graham Crosby in car number 6 through the fast sweeping left-hander. And in fact, Dick Johnson, as he comes up into the right-hander, Dick, you're a fairly busy man at the moment. Too busy, in fact, to talk to us by the sound of things as he goes through Penrite Corner. He's got Colin Bond right behind him.
Wait till he gets around Castrol, they'll have a bit of open space in front of him.
Yeah, right behind, all right.
I knew you were there somewhere.
Right beside.
Bit busy there, Dick.
Oh, mate, she's a pretty busy little circuit, this.
Up.
There goes Bondy.
That was a bit slick.
Yeah, mate, it's dead set of tyre war around here. You get these big crackers of motor cars, pretty empty. But guess what?
What?
Ross is behind.
You've been waiting for weeks to say that. So how are your tyres?
Well, I don't know, there's a long way to go yet, mate.
Yeah. Are they holding up at the moment?
Well, sort of half. There's heaps of oil around here. I don't know what happened, but somebody exploded something.
I think that could have been Tony Longhurst, actually.
Oh, well, you can't win them all.
How physical is this racetrack, Dick? It's a very small one, and it seems like you're turning all the time.
Mate, I got the lowest dip I got, and they don't even get top gear. She's like Robert D. Costello running a marathon round his clothesline.
Mate, you look pretty busy in there at the moment. How are you going to be after an hour?
I don't know, mate. I don't know how many laps we've done, but...
12.
Is that all?
Yes.
It's
the rest of it's going to be pretty hard, because especially if the tyres go south.
Well, why don't you talk us around for a lap, Dick, and tell us a bit about what you're doing.
Okay, well, we're back to third here. To a right-hander, Coca-Cola. Another right-hander here, a bit of a dab on the brakes, whole third. It's a fast left-hand sweeper. Which meant fourth gear, just feathering the throttle. That's all that oil. And then to a hard, with the car all out of shape, you've got to brake really hard for a U-turn through Penrite here. Accelerate in second, round to the left, and then another U-turn onto the main straight. And listen, why don't you talk to Cross and amuse him for a while, mate? He's catching me.
Mate, he can almost talk to you.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for the talk around, Dick. We'll come back to you later in the race.
Not a worry.
Dickie Johnson carrying our race cam. Colin Bonds got by there on the outside, and Cross has joined in now to make life reasonably unbearable for the green Mustang pilot.
I noticed David Oxton has taken his second off-track excursion, and I think it might be the final one. He's going to park it on the midfield somewhere. And up front, things are unchanged. We better report that fact to you, with Gary Scott still leading from Jim Richards, then George Fury, Robbie Francevic and John Bauer.
The interesting thing in this race is, of course, Dick Johnson now running in 7th spot. Graham Crosby is 8th. But coming up to them very quickly is Peter Brock in 9th. He's probably 150 metres back behind them, but gaining all the time. And we'll pick that up for you a little later as Graham Crosby. We take on our second race cam. You'll notice Dick's car sliding around just a little bit as he comes out of that corner into the left-hander. Cros busy at the wheel at this stage. Up to Castrol, a very tight right-hander, basically a U-turn. Now the run down the straight to the S's, where Cross should get closer. There's Colin Bond. We saw go past on the inside at this spot only a couple of laps ago, and Peter Brock stalking them all the time.
He's done a fine job to make up so much ground, and you get some idea here of just how hard the drivers work and how tight and tricky the circuit is. Cross coming up onto pit straight. He's had a pretty crook weekend so far. He's broken an axle and had to do a lot of overnight type work on the Commodore. Set the car up very much harder than they have had for the last few meetings, and I understand that Graham's in a position to talk to us, and I'd say, Cross, like Dick, you're a fairly busy man at the moment as well.
I'm pretty busy.
Well, you're making some ground up here.
I am? Oh, great. Doesn't feel like it. This place is really slippery. I can't seem to get any traction at all. However, if that's any indication, we're not going to wear out the tyres. We've got poor old Dick up here. I can read palm and tube bills totally sideways all the time. So, you know, I think he's just about as much trouble as I am. We're both running, 1,300 kilogram cars, heaviest of the bunch. And these horrible, look at that little yellow one up there. There's no way it should be there, but around this sort of circuit, that's what a little car can do.
So how's your car at the moment, Cross? Holding together okay?
Like a bullet. No, it's going real good, actually. A little bit of understeer, which is going to be okay as the tyres wear. It'll develop into an oversteer situation, which hopefully won't happen for a while, because they still feel it's in pretty good shape, the tyres. I see we've just been given a 67.4, which is about 3 seconds slower than what we qualified, but really the circuit feels as if it's got a lot of oil on it,
So what sort of tyres did you ultimately decide to use?
Round black rubber ones.
High-tech stuff.
Yeah.
Mate, this part of the circuit's a bit of fun.
Oh, yeah, you should have... I hope you got that other part on camera before, when the Capri, or that horrible little Ford thing, did a U-turn in front of us, and then Tony Longhurst disappeared off the track in a cloud of smoke. I just about had to go into instruments to go through all the smoke that was poured out.
So have you ever been round here on a bike?
Yep. It was damn sight easier on a bike, I can tell you.
I reckon it might have been.
Oh, yeah, well, here we go. Yeah, no, it's definitely a good little circuit on a bike.
Well, you've got the treble now, Cross. You've been around on bikes, cars and horses.
Yeah, I reckon Dick Johnson might have pinched a couple of horses that he rode the other day, because he's got a bit more than he has had the previous.
Thanks very much, Graham Crosby. Meanwhile, of course, it's all happening back up front, with Gary Scott in car number 15 still leading in the Peter Jackson Nissan Skyline from Jimmy Richards and the JPS BMW. There's Richards coming into view. George Fury still running third on the road. Fourth is Robbie Francevic, and fifth is John Bauer. So they have that great scrap still going. Scott not really extending the Nissan Skyline at this stage. Most of the lap times are certainly well and truly off practice marks yesterday. That'll give you an indication of the split in the field. Scott going through, Richards in second, and George Fury, who hasn't let Richards get too far away from him since the race started.
And Brock, as we mentioned, is back in 8th place on the racetrack, 9th place rather. There he is.
Well, the thing is with Brock at the moment is he's about to encounter Graham Crosby and Dick Johnson as they come down the straight. There's the shot, gives you some idea of the gap. So he's certainly made up a lot of ground, but he's making it up on the guys at the midfield, not at the head of the field.
It's been a lonely chase for Peter Brock, but having dropped out to dead last, he's done a good job to get back through the pack to be sitting just behind Graham Crosby. Crosby pulled in Dick Johnson quickly in 5 laps, but hasn't been able to go on and pass Johnson at this stage. And Brock has been gaining on the two of them all the time.
Been a funny old championship for Brock. 5th at Amaroo Park, and then 2 did not finish results at Symmons Plains and Adelaide. And a 12th at Wanneroo. Of course, a great first, and there's his team manager, Tony Di Gennaro, talking to the media. A first placing at Surfers was a brilliant performance. 5th at Calder, where he couldn't really come to terms with even his teammate, John Harvey, at one stage. And then after his pole position, a fine performance at Lakeside, ultimately a 3rd. Coming out of the right-hander at Castrol, you can see how much closer he is to Graham Crosby. Here's Peter Brock's profile. There's the rundown of his Touring Car Championship performances so far this year. 41 years of age, based in Melbourne. Started his racing career here in a Winton, in a Austin, should I say, A30, a Holden-powered Austin A30, which is pretty amazing. I said to him yesterday, it's taken you about 15 years to do the full circle.
You know, it's 13 years since he's actually raced here, though.
Is it?
Yeah.
So Peter Brock, the man we're following at the moment, as he hones in on the back of Graham Crosby's number 6 Commodore.
20 laps completed, 30 rain in round 9 of the Touring Car Championship.
This race could well and truly come down to tyres. So I have a feeling that George Fury, who has been just sitting on the back of Jimmy Richards' BMW, hasn't tried any adventurous stuff.
Gary Scott actually is getting away a little bit in front. There's a terrific scrap going on between the Volvo teammates Robbie Francevic and John Bauer for 4th and 5th positions.
There's Brocky.
Crosby there just in front, so Brock really is eating up the ground on this pair. Dick Johnson leading the trio. Crosby sandwiched in there, but as we go to a break after 21 laps, Gary Scott continues to lead from Jim Richards and George Fury.
Fighting with this dice because it is really the scrap of the race so far. Up front, Scott still leads. They're coming up now on a slower car.
Scott doesn't just still lead, Mark. He's actually pulled away a bit from Jim Richards and has opened up a gap of nearly 2 seconds, with a further second between Jim Richards and George Fury in 3rd place.
I also have to apologise because we've only just reached half race distance, 25 laps. It wasn't 28, it was 23 before. Notice Dick Johnson had his hand out the window a few moments ago as they came down the back straight.
They'll all be doing it next.
Maybe it's catching.
Once again, down to the right-hander. Cross makes a move, this time on Johnson, tries to get out. Look at Brock climb up on the curbs, tries to get the pair of them. That didn't work. Looks spectacular, though.
I didn't think Brock was going to catch it then. Really had it crossed up sideways.
He's trying desperately to put some pressure on Graham Crosby. He's settled into a pattern behind Johnson. And Johnson looking quite competitive in the midfield after starting in the race.
Back on 7th, I think it was, or somewhere down there. He was a little bit way down the grid.
No, 10. So Johnson's done very well in the number 17 Mustang. Must be counting the days until the homologation package goes through on the new Cosworth Sierras. He's able to take them all on next year with a very, very competitive car. Cross feinting a manoeuvre here. Well, there's no way he'll get through here. Brock will pick up the pieces here if he's not careful.
I'd hate to go around the outside through that tight little turn.
The only way straight across the grass there you could gain ground.
Well, he's been known to do it before.
Here's Brock again looking down the inside.
This is where Brock made his move last time.
Here's race cam through Graham Crosby's Commodore, Systine Computers Commodore. We swing round and find out the other Commodore pilot, 05 Peter Brock, is still sitting there. And this will be becoming a little frustrating for Brock.
Yeah, he's the one that was charging from the back of the field after dropping out to last on the first lap.
Well, the leaders have got about a 2/3 of a lap lead on these drivers here at the moment. through on Brian Sampson in the Turbo Starion.
On him was the right word, too.
Pushed him out into the grass. There was no room at all when those three cars went through. The next driver they'll encounter will be Gerald Kay in the Jag Parts Commodore.
This is a terrific dice between these three of the top touring car drivers. Really going at it hammer and tong.
And Crosby, I think, doing a wonderful job to come to terms with the game this year so quickly. Just the shot again from out the back of the Systime Commodore.
Brock moving from side to side, looking for any which way through there.
He's very skatey through that part of the track. It's a bit of opposite lock. He's doing it in practice. Certainly looks spectacular. At this stage, though, he's got to pick up Crosby. And then if he does, in fact, find a way past Crosby, it's his old mate Dick Johnson to deal with. How close can you be to an opponent? He's a little busy at this stage trying to find the right line. Just a place to pass here at Winton. There's only a couple of short straights. They're coming onto one of them now. But you really have to have that much more horsepower to be able to pull out of the line and try and pass. Here's Crosby coming down the outside again. And passes Johnson, but he needs to pull it in tight to get through here. He's out very wide in the boondocks, but he's done it. So Crosby moves back. Dick gives them plenty of cover as they come out of the turn, and now comes back down the inside of Graham Crosby. Brock's going to go for the inside run as well as they make their way down to the right-hander. So Graham Crosby past Dick Johnson. Brock still to effect a pass on the green Mustang number 17. It's been quite fascinating, actually, and the scrap of the race. We're watching the leaders, and they have spread well and truly out. Still Scott leading from Jimmy Richards and George Fury, clear of the two Volvos.
6 Australian Touring Car Championships shared between Peter Brock and Dick Johnson, both former James Hardy winners. And of course, Graham Crosby, one of the hot shoes of motorcycle racing, being the world Formula One champion. Look here as Brock now tries to make a way around the outside of Johnson. Crosby, in fact, getting away just a little bit here as he comes up onto the back of Gerald Kay. There's Murray Carter in the background of the Turbo Nissan, and here goes Peter Brock up onto the outside. Can he do a Crosby? Turns in very late, and I think he's managed to squeeze through side by side, and in the end, Dick Johnson has to let him go by. That was pretty good driving from Brock, and gives Dick a...
And Dick starts waving his hand. Lacings of Lakeside. So, good driving from Peter Brock. Dead last after the car, we presume, jammed in gear. Took off after the field and is now coming up to try and haunt Graham Crosby again. The Volvos, of course, are still continuing their private dice with Robbie Francevic, the Australian Touring Car Championship leader, in the number 10 car, and, of course, John Bower shadowing him throughout this race.
4th and 5th on the racetrack, behind the leading trio of Scott, Richards and Fury.
30 laps completed.
Bower had the better of the start out of these two, and Robbie reeled him in after 4 or 5 laps, but hasn't really been able to break away from his teammate, and the leading trio are getting away from them.
Francevic, the series leader, on 179 points from Fury 158. Longhurst out of this race with 110 third. Jimmy Richards in 4th, 107. Then Johnson, 89 points, just ahead of Graham Crosby. Not a bad performance so far in this year's Australian Touring Car Championship for Robbie Francevic. He's really done it quite comfortably early in the series, bolted away with some fine performances, and all the time consolidating his points run. And let's take a look, in fact, at the career highlights of Robbie Francevic. There's the rundown so far this year. Great wins at Amaru Park, Symmons Plains, Adelaide. Bad run for him at Calder, and his tally 179, 44 years of age. A Nissan dealer from Auckland in New Zealand, and one of the great all-rounders in motorsport. Driving the newer of the two Volvos today. The right-hand drive car only delivered into the country around about 8 weeks ago. In fact, I think it was for the Adelaide Touring Car Round. John Bower in what's affectionately known as the Old Nail, the left-hand drive car, and he's still hanging on quite nicely. The two cars are obviously very evenly matched, so too are the skills of the drivers.
Yes, Robbie Francevic been like a breath of fresh air for the Touring Car Championship for 1985 and particularly 1986. As Neil said, starting the season in brilliant style. But it's all sort of gone away a little in a couple of races, a few problems. However, Robbie is driving to instructions, and that is obviously to finish only a spot or two ahead or a spot or two behind George Fury, but don't give him a break on the field.
Robbie was also the New Zealand Grand Prix winner back in '72 and also took the New Zealand Touring Car Championship in '83. He's done plenty of open wheel racing apart from his sedan racing and did quite a successful stint in the US. Not many people know about that. There's John Bauer, reigning Australian driving champion, as we go to the Castrol scoreboard, compliments of Digital, and leading...
Winton, you know the old saying about horses for courses? Well, Winton was built for the Alpha. Colin Bond in 6th place on the racetrack, and terrific showing by this 2.5 litre car here in this 9th round of the Australian Touring Car Championship.
Still 10 cars on the same lap. Murray Carter being 10th on the road at the moment in the independent Nissan Skyline.
35 laps gone in the race and 15 remaining.
Best performance from Colin Bond so far in the series, a 4th placing at Sandown, a 13th at Adelaide, an 8th at Wanneroo, a 10th at Calder. So it hasn't been the absolute best of runs for him in this year's championship, although he's only just returned from Italy and Belgium, where he tells me that the new Alpha 75 is looking very good on paper. And car builders Luigi Racing are on the job at the moment. The car should be here for the Castrol 500 at Sandown in September in the lead up to the James Hardy 1000. The car most likely, of course, to be an outright contender. One of the other interesting things that I forgot to mention when we're looking at Dick Johnson is the fact that the man that partnered this driver last year at the James Hardy 1000, Queensland's Greg Hansford, has in fact been signed by Johnson in the Palmer Tube Mills Mustang to co-drive the long-distance events. Dick asked me to pass that on in today's telecast, so that's great news for the Queenslanders. Good to have Hansford back in a car, a competitive car, regularly at the wheel.
Should mention too, as we follow Colin Bond round, that Gary Scott continues to lead only by just over 1 second from Jim Richards. But the interesting thing is that they've dropped George Fury off a bit. He's almost 3 seconds astern now, Jim Richards.
It's interesting, isn't it? Gary Scott, a fine performance in yesterday's qualifying. It's only his 2nd drive of this car this season, although he did do about 3 or 4 laps only at the Surfers Paradise round in pre-race practice. Very little experience at the wheel and very much a rusty driver, having not driven for nearly 12 months. Excellent performance from him. He had a bit of a go last year in the Nissan Turbos in the Pulsar series, and of course he also ran the old Group C Bluebird in a couple of sports sedan races, but I think he's come back on song pretty nicely.
Peter Brock still making ground, having finally got by Dick Johnson and Graham Crosby. There's Cros. And just behind him there in car 21 is Graham Lusty. Poor old Graham, he's put up the bread to sponsor the race and had to start from the rear of the grid himself, but he hasn't done a bad job.
I mean, he's done it not too badly at all, Gary. Lusty Allison Semi-Trailers, one of the biggest organisations, their type. And Graham Lusty, the sponsor of the 9th round of the Australian Touring Car Championship. Local boy, and good to see him supporting the local circuit. He powers on. He's already been passed by both Peter Brock and by Graham Crosby. And shortly, I would think, by Dick Johnson will have a lap put on him as well.
Just did a little bit of calculation whilst we were looking at the Lusty car there, and assuming, and it's very much a case of assumption, that the placings remain the same in the top few drivers. Francevic would go on to 199 points in the series and Fury to 181. That would leave a 12-point margin for the Castrol Grand Final at Sydney's Oran Park on July the 13th. And wouldn't that be a sensation to have so few points between these drivers when we go to the 10th and final round in a fortnight's time?
I would agree with you there, and what a classic field they've attracted with all the Sydney drivers, all the independents, looking forward to joining the factory boys there for the final round. There's the man running in the top 10, veteran Murray Carter in the Nissan Skyline, the privately entered Everlast battery turbo special, number 36. Good to see Murray back and following the trail. The car's been running very, very well throughout the weekend. started off position 13 and still running in the top 10.
You can look back through the history of Australian motor racing in the last 20 or 25 years, and other than perhaps Bob Holden, Murray Carter is the only other name that's synonymous with the sport for so long. And he was last here in December driving a production car, and there is the race leader, only around about 5 seconds behind Gary Scott, almost coming round to lap the man that's 10th on the road. Jim Richards still lurking. You can see the gap as they come through the S's, and as Gary quite rightly pointed out before, George Fury now falling well away from these drivers, although he's not really falling back into the clutches of the Volvo too, so perhaps it's the two leaders pulling away more so than George dropping back.
It poses a hypothetical point for Freddie Gibson, for the points issue at stake, 21 still to make up on Robbie Francevic. Is it better to have Gary Scott win the race, or is it better to have Jim Richards win the race and have George Fury run second and Gary Scott third?
I might have to sit down for 5 minutes and figure all that out.
Well, if you think it out on points, is it more important to go for a race win in round 9 or to help George's points table for the championship overall?
I'd like to see Freddie Gibson explain that to Gary Scott on the pit board.
Yes, would be hard.
Well, the difficulty there is Jim Richards, and he's not going to let George Fury through in much of a hurry, I can tell you.
Fury's dropping right off the pace of the leading two.
Watching him come out of the right hand at that time at Castrol, he was very ordinary. There's Jim Richards in second. In fact, I'll do a split between Richards and Fury. There goes Richards past our commentary point. The gap opening now to 5.8 seconds between the reigning Australian Touring Car Champion and George, who's been the runner-up before in the Australian Touring Car Championship.
And it's 9 seconds from Fury back to Robbie Francevic in 4th spot.
This is a heartening performance from the BMW 635. This is the gap as they come through the sweeping left-hander back to Fury, and there he is in car 30.
10 laps remaining in the race.
George, an Australian rally champion on a couple of occasions, winner of the Southern Cross Rally, and I guess it's fairly easy to predict that sometime in the next few years it's likely that this man will become an Australian Touring Car Champion, joining people like Colin Bond. And as he said when he spoke with Mike Raymond earlier in our program, all he needs now, with about a round and a third remaining, is an ounce of luck. This car is going to be a sensation at Bathurst, that's for sure. In fact, he's already thrown down the gauntlet. George Fury is going to go to the mountain with the view towards knocking off that stunning lap time that he did in qualifying in the Bluebird of 2 minutes 13.9 seconds. And who would have thought that a Group A Nissan Skyline in less really than 6 months would have been able to come to terms so quickly. And look, as he goes underneath Lusty, who locks up at brakes, and now heads off towards the sweeping left-hander. Who would have thought that he would have been so competitive? A great performance from Gibson as we go to the Castrol scoreboard and confirm again that Gary Scott leads from Jim Richards, and in 3rd place, George Fury.
Battle for 4th and 5th place in round 9 of the Australian Touring Car Championship continues. New Zealander Robbie Francevic and Tasmanian John Bower running bumper to bumper in the Valvoline Volvo Turbos. If they stay the way they are on the road at the moment, guarantee Robbie a good shot at the Touring Car crown for 1986. Things haven't changed up at the front, and Francevic is gliding through the turns here very nicely indeed, very conservative.
I made a blue before, Mike, with my points calculation, assuming they stay the way they were. The gap would be 18 points when we went to Oran Park.
So 18 would be the difference. It's getting a bit tight here as they come down on Graham Lusty. Another of the Commodores here with Robbie Francevic, John Bower sitting in behind him.
Well, I doubt very much whether John is going to go barging through and carve up the team leader.
John just gave the chap in the Commodore a nice signal as they went past. However, they were having their own scrap down to the run to Mike Glynn distance sweeper, and Francevic very nicely positioned in this race, the 9th round today. There he goes in car number 10. Will pick up the national touring car title for Volvo after looking so good last season in the privately entered Mark Petch car. That's the car that John Bowe is running here today. And they, of course, won the Castrol Grand Final at Sydney's Oran Park last year. 5 laps remain in round 9, presented by Lusty Allison semi-trailers. And things looking good for Gary Scott in the number 15 Nissan Skyline Turbo.
I'll tell you what is a battle at the moment for the drivers as they come up towards this pit straight. There's the sun in their eyes. There's plenty of it. And notice a few of the drivers going up there, shading their eyes. Pretty difficult to get through that right-hander at the end of the pit straight, the way things are at the moment. So, interesting to speculate on just exactly how the points might be, the way you can go through all the different combinations, but one thing's for sure, it looks as though Volvo at the moment are on target, adding another brand to the long list. Ford have 12 victories in the Australian Touring Car Championship, General Motors have 8, Jaguar have 4, Mazda 1, BMW 1, and if Robbie takes it this year, he'll be the second Kiwi to do so in 2 years.
Robbie's still the commuting Kiwi too, travels back to his home base in New Zealand after each touring car round and flies back for some testing. Gary Scott, of course, continues as the race leader for round 9. There he goes in the Peter Jackson Nissan Turbo, number 15, heading down to the Nissan Sweeper, and coming up behind Graham Crosby.
Great job for him. The last round of the Touring Car Championship at Lakeside in Queensland. He's coming up pretty quickly onto the back of Graham Crosby at the moment. So he's already displaced Dick Johnson and Murray Carr and a bunch of others. So when you start lapping people like that, you're really on the pace. But there he is coming underneath Crosby's car as they come out of the right-hander at Castrol. And you can hear the problems that Cross is having getting power to the ground. The Commodore really having a roar. Plenty of wheel spin. And George comes through on the inside. Has to lock up a little bit, but squeezes by. Crosby realising, of course, that he's now 1 lap down on the race leader. So Scott looking pretty good here at the moment.
About 3 laps remaining in this 9th round of the championship. Gary Scott, who told Neil and Gary even before the race that he planned to give George all the support in the world for this race. Well, George has not really been on the boil. He's been running a strong 3rd, but he's been unable to do anything about the JPS BMW. Yes, Graham Crosby going through. Here's Jim Richards still to put a lap on Cros and the number 6 Commodore. While this has been happening, of course, Gary Scott has been able to waltz away just a little from Jimmy Richards in car number 1. Richards now through on the inside of Graham Crosby as they come down the back straight. Trying to get into the pattern again with about 2 3/4 laps to go, whether or not he has enough left to mount a charge and go after the race lead. He sat very comfortably in second since this race has started, and I think would be delighted to be able to pick up a very solid second placing here today for BMW. So Richards continues. Car number 1 running in second. George Fury probably 5 or 6 seconds back behind him. And Gary Scott going away from Richards down through the sweeper area. There's Gary Scott, car number 15. How strong the Nissan team looking for the Endurance Championship a little later this season. They already have a proven number 2 in Glenn Seaton and Gary Scott. And of course, an equal, I should have called them equal number 1s actually, to George Fury. And they haven't announced a 4th driver for the team at this stage. Very competitive team. Coming up now for what should be the final lap. As Gary Scott goes across the strike, heads down into the right-hander.
I think that, if anything, Jim Richards is starting to close a bit on Scott.
Well, he was right on his bumper probably about three laps ago and got caught up in that manoeuvre on Graham Crosby. He's coming at him very, very strong now as they head through the sweeper area. Jim warming up to this as Scott heads up to Penrite for the final time. A right-hander.
I tell you what, he's really covering some ground in that BMW at the moment. It's a pity there's not a little bit of extra time in this race. We'd have a fascinating finish. About 2.5, maybe 3 car lengths at the very most, separating first from second as they go up to Castrol now for the last time.
They'll have a run down the short straight to the S's, but here is the scrap. Jimmy Richards.
And that's where he loses out, when the horsepower of the turbo Nissan really comes into its own. But how strong will Richards be through these S's for the final run to the flag?
They head into Ollie's S's now for the final time. Gary Scott in car number 15, the Peter Jackson Nissan, out of the last turn, heading towards the checkered flag. And Gary Scott, car number 15, takes round 9 here at Winton Motor Raceway from Jim Richards, and third place goes to George Fury in the second Nissan.